Has arrived. I would like to call this meeting of the Sandy Springs City Council for Monday, August 14th, 2023. The city clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Rusty Wall,
Right.
Councilmember John Paulson,
Here.
Councilmember Tootie DeJulie, Councilmember Melody Kelly. Councilmember,
President, well, I don't know.
Councilmember Melissa Mueller.
Here.
Councilmember Jody Rochelle.
Here.
Councilmember Tiffy DeJulia. Absent Councilmember Andy Bowman.
I'm here.
Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda?
Mayor Paul.
Mr. Paulson.
Approval of the meeting agenda for Monday, August 14th, 2020.
Have a motion by Mr. Paulson. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Rochelle. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on approval of the meeting agenda. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Meeting agenda is approved. I'll open the public hearing and turn it over to the city manager.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council. Today, we are gathered together for our first of our required 3 public hearings to set the 2023 millage rate. I've asked the Chief Financial Officer, Tony Carlisle, to walk us through a few slides this morning about our millage rate and the proposed amount, which is the same as what is in our charter, 4.731. Ms. Carlisle.
Good morning, Mayor Paul and City Council. Next slide, please. This is the presentation that we review each year, just updated with more accurate information. So the first slide is where do our tax dollars go? So this is an allocation of the total millage for Sandy Springs, which is 31.851%. And as you can see, 14.9% of the millage comes to Sandy Springs. About 6% goes to Fulton bonds, and then 29.3% goes to Fulton operations and maintenance, and then the school district receives 55.2% of the total funds collected. Next slide. These are the millage rates identified for each of the cities and local cities to us in Fulton County. We've had somewhat of a struggle this year obtaining information from Fulton County, as before they presented all this information in one fine document, and this year we kind of had to go out and find it ourselves on websites and reaching out to the local cities. But based on the information that we gather, the millage rate for each of the cities is listed with their maintenance operation rate, and then the bond rate that's applicable. For Alpharetta is 4.951, Atlanta 8.52, Johns Creek 3.986, Milton is at 4.469. However, they're setting their rate in September, so this is last year's rate. Roswell at 4.463, and we are still at 4.731 for a millage rate. Next slide. We want to present to you what tax value looks like for Sandy Springs. We took a home value, face market value of $500,000. Taking 40% of that's $200,000 with the homestead exemption of $15,000 brings it down to $185,000 taxable value. So that's the amount that 4.731 would be applied to for your tax rate. We further want to explain that on the next slide of how we would look at that for a home valued at $626,000, which is the average rate of a home in Sandy Springs as of today. So the very first column is at 100%, $626,000. The exemption amount is $15,000, leaving a taxable value of $611,567. The second column represents the $15,000 at 4.731% millage rate. Shows you that you would pay a tax amount of $2,893.32. The last column is without homestead, showing that you would pay a tax amount of $2,964.20. If we roll the taxes back to 4.3803 at $15,000 exemption, you would pay $2,678.82 with a savings of $214.50. Without the homestead exemption, the taxable amount is $2,744.52. A savings of $219.77. That's again at $626,000. We also want to give you an example of a home valued at $1,080,000. Next slide, please. Same scenario at 4.731% in the middle column. The tax at 4.731% would be $5,038.52. With the rollback, you would pay $4,664.97 with a tax savings of $373.54. Without the homestead, you would pay $5,109.48 at 4.731% and $4,730.68 with a tax savings of $378.80. So that's how taxpayers should view their tax value of their homes if we were to roll back to 4.383%.
Tony, let me ask a question. Yeah, we have a provision in law that raises the homestead exemption so that the maximum increase in any tax would be either 3% or the CPI, whichever one's lower. Do these numbers calculate that into these?
These take that into consideration. We did speak to Henry Bigham at Fulton County Tax Assessor's Office.
Right.
And I don't think that information, the calculation that he provided is not, there's kind of detailed, but he said that the 3% is taken off, the maximum 3% is taken off before the tax bill goes out.
So that's calculated in those numbers that you.
Yes.
showed.
Can I step in? Sure. Go back to the slide. Actually,
One more.
so Rusty, I think to your question, I think I would say it probably doesn't in the sense that, no, but I mean, this is sort of, there's no way to have an apples to apples because that's a floating homestead exemption.
Right.
This basically is using the base, but yes, your point is that the increases are mitigated by that. But you could probably apply any homestead exemption and I think the key number here is the 8%. Right. So apples to apples, your difference is 8%. But if you had a massive increase, you would still, I think to your point, you would get in value, your homestead exemption would also have gone up.
Right.
Under the floating. This is just a base level case. I think the key number here is the 8%. And that's the amount of the rollback. It sounds like the assessment base is effectively about an 8% higher. The tax roll is about 8% higher because to roll back, you'd have to come back to you'd have to roll back your millage rate 8%.
Well, that's why I'm confused, because at least the homeowner can't have an increase of more than 3%.
CPI.
Right.
Right. So the total number, the the property value is what he provided to us, not that number, but the property value saying that amount takes into consideration of 3%.
No, but they would have an 8% savings. I mean, because the millage rate would come back. The tax doesn't, our floating rate cap affects homestead exemption. It doesn't affect millage rate, right? So it would actually be a greater reduction than the increase. Anyway, that's my observation.
Do we need to get more clarification from Fulton County?
Just be sure that we're looking at the accurate number. That's all I'm trying to get at.
I'll take a look at the information he sent via email and see if I can get more clarification.
But I mean, if you had a house that did not have an assessment change, right?
Right.
And that was their homestead exemption. This is it's so fact specific.
Yeah.
Because remember, you have to have it, like anybody who appealed in the last few years was not gonna have an assessment change. So I think your question presumes is the fact from a prior year, right? This is a base level of somebody that has the same assessment as their prior year. If their assessment had gone instead from a property tax value of, I think you'd have to have another line item. If their prior year assessment had been, let's say $850,000, you would need another line item because your exemptions would go up. Right. But if your house was sitting at a flat assessed value, there would be no, you don't get the benefit This has to do with our overall increase. There are two different, there's so many different,
There are a lot of moving parts.
there's a lot of moving parts to this.
What is the aggregate dollar impact on the budget?
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, so to answer that question, if we were to roll back to the revenue neutral number of 4.3803, that would result in a reduction in our revenue collections of $3,528,422.
Yeah, and one of the questions I had been asking was, of that 3 million number you just gave, of course, that includes commercial properties, right? So the homestead properties would only get a percentage of that. We determined that the percent, I think you have it, I don't know if you have that slide, but.
No, so I've got the numbers and we can have that updated before our next
Right.
public hearing tomorrow evening.
But we can't roll back just on one sort of property, right?
No.
That's the point. Our homes, our millage rate applies only applies to every property regardless of their status, whether a
That's
residence
exactly
with
right.
or without homestead or commercial, it doesn't matter.
Correct.
The millage rate applies across the board, so you can't just roll back on homestead properties.
No.
The only way you can affect that is with the homestead exemption, which is what we tried to do with
That's right,
the floating homestead exemption.
right.
Is keep the taxes on residents as low as possible.
Yeah, the only way you can distinguish would be to say, look, we're gonna granting a greater or some or all baseline homestead exemption. Right. That's right.
We'll reach back out to Fulton County to get some more clarification. on-
I want to just make sure that we're looking at the most accurate numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else?
Oh, back up one slide. Right there. Okay, so here are the basic homestead exemptions that were identified again as of last Friday for each of the local cities. Next slide. And then this slide just references the CPI index that you all were just referring to, that Fulton County indicated that the tax values had already been, the CPI had been applied to the tax values, but we'll get that clarified. And the information that we have from Fulton County, they have gotten a number of appeals as always. The deadline was 7/24. They gave themselves 10 working days to get that resolved. They still do not have a count of how many they've totally received, and then they've not completed the assessments yet for the appeals.
If you go back to that prior slide,
Can we raise our homestead exemption?
that's fine. Yeah, but so I was gonna say, if you go back to that prior slide, I think, no, one forward now. As a result of there being inflation now, regardless of what happened to if somebody's property went up a lot or whatever, the most their Sandy Springs tax could go up is 3%. I think that's fine. In fact, up until this year, for the last several years, since inflation was virtually at zero, they weren't able to, and it's whichever is less, it hasn't gone up at all. Even if their assessment has gone up, it's been held. Yes, that was the question I was asking. That led to the email response to Jody's question is, could we raise the homestead exemption? And I guess the follow-up question, can we raise the homestead exemption if we want, potentially only on certain categories?
My understanding is you can't raise it on certain
Seniors.
categories. I'll have to get with the city attorney's office. I don't believe.
Income-based, veteran, disabled veterans, or everybody. I mean, that was the question, is because one way to try to mitigate potentially tax impact to folks without changing the millage rate across the board would be through homestead exemptions if you want to deal with homeowners. And then how do you slice and dice that? I mean, it's not a huge amount of money when you look at it. But I have actually, in the connection with this one, I've heard from some people that you wouldn't naturally maybe think about, but who live in homes that maybe have a high value because of their longevity in Sandy Springs. They've been here for many years and big property values, but they're ranch houses that maybe were, bought for under $100,000 back in the day. And with time, you might say, well, that property is worth $2 million. So how can they have an issue? Well, I think there are people on fixed incomes at all levels of property homes that are feeling the impact of inflation. and the impact of the rise in values over a long term, because in any one year, it shouldn't be a whole lot. So the question would be, do we as a city want to think about providing a little bit, and it's a little bit only, of relief and what the impact would be across the board for homes? Or do we want to tie it to something like, veterans or disabled veterans, which I think they already get some, John, I'm not sure, or seniors? Or do you want to do it? The other thing you could maybe do is a freeze. You could potentially do a freeze, but that's only, people need to, I've talked to a lot of people. They have to understand that there's Sandy Springs tax. John, you asked a question about if I have a $5,000 tax bill. Well, if you have a $5,000 city tax bill, your house is probably $2-3 million. But if you have a total $5,000 tax bill, since it's 15%, your Sandy Springs bill is $750. And most people say they get pretty good services for that. There's very, very little we could do, but I think it's also, some people say roll it back. It's a message you send to your community. So I think it's something we ought to look at. I'm not saying we have time to do it this year, but we have the benefit of these numbers.
Yeah, the challenge is you've already passed the budget based on a millage rate.
But
So we have to adjust the
But we
budget.
ought to make this a little bit more than pro forma this year, and sort of be mindful of that. Just put it on our minds, I would say, with your question, Jody, on the homestead exemption, whether maybe 15,000 is the right numbers when you look at the other communities. Have other communities done rollbacks? I would be very cautious about a rollback, because in many, many ways it is inequitable. People get the benefit if they have not had increases on their own properties, but they still get the benefit of it.
Well, you've got situations like you've got the apartment complexes, which get a pretty hefty cut.
Right.
That's not going into to help the tenants. It's going into the pockets of the.
That's right.
That's why.
And so-
exemption
And
big.
yeah, and somebody, I focused on that exemption, and somebody that has not had an increase in value, but because the rolls have gone up overall, you're rolling back that tax. And that's not really what this is such a macro 30,000 foot level concept, but it is really not targeted to the people who have felt the impact of the increases.
Right. You're probably helping the more affluent people.
Without a doubt, and commercial.
And commercial
Yeah.
and apartment owners, which we're having higher levels of service for
Right.
too. So we can take a look at it and see.
We should look at the homestead.
I mean, as a senior now, I've always, even before I was a senior, I argued that the school system should have some kind of break.
Right.
And they have fought and fought and fought and fought, and that's 55%. If you really want to have an impact.
That's right.
Seniors, it's gonna come through the school
And
system.
they've only recently come along, haven't they, on the CAT?
They rolled back a little.
A
this
tiny-
Well, no, but a float. I think there's now a float. Do they not have a floating now?
The legislature imposed floating one on Fulton. I don't know if they did it on the school system.
School might. I have to go back and look at
I may have to see, but that's the biggest jump.
But that's the one I've heard. I think the now being on this council for 10 years, I think the one that I've heard most consistently is from seniors. And without a doubt, they are reflecting not on their Sandy. I don't think I've ever encountered somebody that doesn't feel like they get value for their Sandy Springs taxes. It's not the Sandy Springs tax that I hear about. It's their total tax. Well, I get it. I mean, you look at your bill is your bill. And then if you point out, well, you're paying $875 of Sandy Springs city tax, do you feel like, police and roads, you're getting it? Yeah, they did, of course.
Anything else?
We'll work on some additional answers for the next one, but we'll also start working on this as something to consider during the next year budget process.
All right, great. All right, any public comment cards?
No.
All right. Mayor, I move adjournment. Mr. Paulson moves adjournment. Seconded by Ms. Rochelle. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. This is the longest hearing we've ever had.